talking Illinois high school football.
If your goals are as high as you talk about, tonight's the night you go out and just take one more step.
It's a view from the West.
And it starts right now!
Welcome into View from the West podcast, the podcast covering Illinois high school football on the western side of the state of Illinois. I'm your host, Greg Armstrong, joined once again, as always, by Mitch Stormer. A special episode, a special edition of the Instant REAX podcast. Mitch, the vote just came down. It was just announced. Proposal 18 to implement district football in the state of Illinois has failed. So here we are. Conferences are remaining for now. Take me through just kind of your initial thoughts and kind of where you're sitting right now.
Yeah, so if you listen to our episode that we did with Steve Susi, I think it's pretty clear that we were adamant that we weren't fans of this particular proposal. I think we started even talking about just the theory of districts like mid-season. It wasn't even proposed at that time, and I was very against it. I feel like I've softened on that stance a little bit. Certainly not was ever going to be in support of this particular proposal. But, when we talk to coaches and seeing the support that at least the theory of districts has, I could probably get on board with it. But the way that this was proposed, it wasn't really a solution at all. So, personally, I'm happy that it did not pass. But yeah, it's not going to be the end of that discussion. May not be districts, but certainly it seems like there's always going to be an effort to always have the best interest of all the schools in mind, and that may not always mean conferences.
Yeah, I think the landscape of IHSA football will be changing at some point. How drastically and how soon is yet to be determined. But I think as you read some of the statement that came out from the IHSA today, along with the vote, I think you can see that they're going to try to be proactive and look at finding solutions. And I think that's what excites me. We'll get to that in a second, to what was in that statement. But I think that's what excites me, because similar to what you said, I think the more I wasn't as opposed to districts. I think going back to our discussions along the way, the initial time this went through several years ago, I was in support of it. I thought it needed to happen, and it did. And then it was taken back. And then I ended up kind of flipping a little bit and thinking, no, maybe I don't want the district play anymore, as I thought I did before. And now as this has gone on, I think I've realized that district football may be good for the state of Illinois. There are teams that certainly need it. In talking to a lot of different coaches, I've had a lot of different text messages and just the form we sent out to get their reaction to when the vote was put on the table. I've heard a lot of differing opinions, and it's all been good to hear, because it kind of helps me shape my opinion as well. I think at some point, district football or some form of it will be needed in the IHSA. But like you said, this proposal was not it. If we're going to do something like this, it cannot be rushed. And this was really trying to rush the system. And there were so many unknowns. And I think what I'm also realizing is we need to find a district format that works for our state, right? There are some formats that work in Texas or in other states around the country, but district football in Illinois is its own beast because of the Chicagoland area, because of the spread of the state and the differing sizes in different areas. I think you need to find a system that works for Illinois. And we didn't have that quite yet. And maybe someday I hope we'll get there to where a district format will meet the needs of almost everybody. It may not ever be perfect, but getting closer to what we need for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's the important key word there is need, right? This is kind of a want versus a need situation where some schools are wanting it, but maybe the state doesn't need it quite yet. But maybe we are shifting that way where the idea to propose it is good, but it's just the execution is poor. So as long as that part is a want, it may not work, but it seems like we are moving towards and things are shifting in a way that it might be needed.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, when I look at everything, I just think that, I've liked the conference format. I've always liked the conference format, but there are some parts of it that are broken, and we've been fairly honest about that. Even if you didn't like this district proposal, Mitch, I think you'd admit that there are some parts of conference play that are broken. You know, and I've heard very strong opinions on both sides. People that really need district football and some that cannot handle it. And I understand both sides. And I hope somewhere along the line there's long-term thought, not a jump to we need to do something right now, but long-term thought to what can really work. And I hope if I'm reading what the IHSA put in their statement today, that maybe we're getting something along those lines. Can you read or paraphrase kind of what was included in that message today?
Yeah. Well, first let's look at what the vote came out to. Right.
Yeah, sure.
This was one proposal as a part of 14 that were amendments that were proposed, 12 of which passed, 2 failed. This particular one for districts, so a proposal that would have, as you mentioned, significantly changed kind of the landscape, football scheduling in the state. So that fails to pass. There were 379 schools that voted against this, 272 that voted for it, with 76 submitting a vote of no opinion. So a bit of a gap there, 107 schools. There's questions to be had there. I tweeted this out prior to the decision that I was curious about how many schools would vote, for or for that matter, number of schools who wouldn't vote if this measure was even going to affect them or not. It turns out that it was the highest voting total in a decade. 89.2% of the IHSA membership participated in this vote.
And that's great to hear. That's
Yeah.
huge.
And you know, there are concerns I have with that, you know, like you have co-op programs that are one football team, but each individual school has its own vote. I don't know what the fix is there, but you know, just things like that kind of are a little questionable. But in any case, again, that was 379 to 272, with 76 having no opinion. And yeah, I think, like you said, it certainly was a hot topic discussion, and it brought out a majority, a big majority of the membership.
Yeah. I think what this proposal, for as much criticism as we had of this exact proposal, I think what it did was it created a lot of really good conversation. And I think it brought a lot of ideas to the table, you know, including from myself. And, you know, not that I necessarily have the ability to draft up a proposal and send it to the IHSA, but I think it gets a lot of people thinking maybe a little bit more creatively. And that excites me, that this proposal really pushed people to say, what can we do differently that will work?
Well, yeah, look at it. You know, 200 and what I say, 272 schools
Yep.
voted for it. 35% of the membership voted for this without having a plan. So it certainly has legs to it, right? There's certainly a lot of backers to this. It's just that this proposal itself just wasn't going to, I don't think was ever going to reach that barrier.
Yeah. Mitch, go through what really stood out to both of us. We talked about it right when we saw the announcement, was kind of the statement that followed, you know, the announcement of the vote, and then the statement that followed. I'm intrigued by. I think there's, you know, interesting talking points in there.
Yeah. So in the release that the IHSA sent out, it has quotes from the IHSA Executive Director, Craig Anderson. And the quote is as follows, quote, "The IHSA Board of Directors has already had discussions about the potential of forming a football ad hoc committee in 2024 in the event that this district proposal failed to pass." He went on to say they want to be proactive in trying to address the issues that are at the root of different football proposals seemingly being brought forth each year. They recognize the myriad of issues in IHSA football are unique and can be based on geography, school size, conference affiliation, and the traditional success of a program, which is why no recent proposals have garnered enough support to pass. There is likely no singular answer to these issues, but the board wants to explore the idea that a large and diverse group from around the state might be able to find some solutions that the high school football community in the state would support.
The IHSA gets a lot of criticism for a lot of different things, and maybe some is fair and some I don't think is justified, but I applaud them for this. They didn't just send out a blanket press release that just gave the number, gave the voting results, and move along. It seems like there's some thought and there's some discussions being had already. I like that,
Yeah.
right? I applaud the IHSA for this one.
Right. It's to their credit to always be open to something like that. They're always going to, have an ear ears on the ground to issues of their membership, and I think it will still be up to the membership to vote on any potential change. But yeah, credit to the IHSA for being willing to listen and willing to adapt.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, obviously in the near term, conferences are here, but for how long? I moving forward, I think there should be discussions being had next football season. And I would think that I don't know if you'd go as far as getting something proposed with some fine detail that could go into place in 25, or if you even push it out to 26 and say, let's do, 1 year of planning and then get a
Right.
drafted proposal and then look ahead. I'm not sure what the timeline would be, but I just know I don't want to rush it.
Right. And I think that's part of the learning lesson here for both sides. If you were a school that proposed it, I think the lesson would be to you're not, and look, I don't want to make it sound like the schools that proposed it uh did anything nefarious or was in any sort of bad intention, right? It just kind of looked that way, right? There was a lot of red flags with this. So I think the lesson for any school that goes forward in proposing this or bringing this up again would be to have something, right? Have some sort of plan that you want to actually vote on, not just the thought of districts. Um, I think the lesson for schools that maybe weren't the ones that proposed it, but were in support of it, would be that look, if you can contribute to that plan, you'll get what you want. It's changes are coming. We just don't know what they're going to look like down the road. There's any number of issues that could push one thing one way, and I think the lesson then for teams that were opposed to it, and I don't know if they're voting just because they don't want districts or just because they didn't want the proposal. I think the lesson for them too is that the same thing. Changes could be coming. So how are you going to put yourself in a position to, have your program in the best how do I want to put it? Always have your programs, best wishes in mind.
Yeah, I think that every program has their own, unique situation and their own reasons for why a change would help them or why a change would hurt them in some examples. And I get it. I hope that when people listen to this, like, I mean, you and I have our opinions, but we're looking at it from, from 5,000 feet in the air. We're looking at the overview of everything and not necessarily on the ground in one
Right.
particular school. So I'm trying to look at it as neutral as possible. I understand both sides of it. And it seems like more so than in years past, the conversation is going to continue. I'm excited. I'm interested to talk to coaches from around our area on both sides of things to see, obviously, are you happy? Are you, dissatisfied with this vote? But then moving forward, what ideas do you have? I want to hear what coaches think about what we can do to make this thing work. And I think a lot of coaches, I hope most coaches would understand both sides of it, right? That, even if they want it, they would understand why somebody wouldn't want it. So let's try to
Right.
come up with ideas. I want to hear what ideas are out there. I'm interested to keep this conversation going.
Yeah, I think you said it too, that maybe you have to do it like they did in 2018, right? The first vote is, hey, the vote is to explore districts. Okay, we're going to explore it. And then in that year or whatever the time is, there is a plan that's in place. And then that plan is what gets voted on,
Yeah.
as opposed to kind of piecemealing this together or just doing a one off with no plan. I even even if there was a plan, right? To implement it within 8 months seemed like a bad idea, even if there was a plan in place. So I think you have to stretch out the time frame a little bit and make sure all the wrinkles are ironed out. But again, have a plan is the biggest, the biggest takeaway for me.
Yeah, I'm sure we will. I'm not, we will advance this discussion down the way with some kind of more concrete ideas. But some things I've seen that the Seuss mentioned in our podcast about this, topic before the vote came out. He talked about pairing up classes 1 and 2, and then pairing up 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8. So that alleviates some of the travel concerns where teams are still going to be more geographically centered than they would be if you're spreading out class 1A, 2A, 3A. They all would still play towards, obviously, the 1A playoffs, the 2A playoff, 3A, etc. I just think that is a creative idea. I haven't read much of the detail on it, but there was an article from down near Edwardsville. Obviously, Edwardsville would be really affected, one of the worst in the state, because they're so big in an area with no one equal to their size. They'd be traveling up to, Bradley, Bourbonnais, and Joliet in their quote-unquote district. They certainly don't want to do this. But I saw they had an idea, not the school, but a newspaper article had an idea about, the bigger schools remain in conferences, and the smaller schools, that would be 4 through 1, go to a district format. And I don't know exactly how they would map that out. Where do schools like Geneseo fall when they're right on the border? But I do think it's intriguing. There are some ideas here that I think if we really talk through them, you could get to a good place where something would work.
Yeah, and I think just going back to that line from Craig Anderson was that there is likely no singular answer to these issues. So anything that gets proposed in the future will have support, and it will have naysayers, rightfully so. So again, is there a right answer? I don't know. Can you get creative with it? Sure. But again, the IHSA is in a quite the predicament, that they're aware that whatever they might decide on, or whatever the future looks like, it may not be right for everybody. And you have to kind of take in, well, is it better for the greater good? And that you could be sacrificing some things with that. So again, this won't be the last time we talk about it. It may be the last time we talk about, districts as we know it at the moment, but it'll be interesting. It'll be quite the challenge for sure.
Yeah. Before we wrap this up, I do want to, say thank you to all the coaches who we sent out a form asking early on what they thought they would vote and kind of what their thoughts were. And Mitch, we had over 25 or more responses from coaches, a lot of very in-depth responses, multiple paragraphs they wrote to us, really detailing their thoughts and how it would affect them and why we needed districts or why we did not need districts. I just want to say thank you to all the coaches for, engaging us in conversation and kind of helping us along the way to understand to the best we could to be able to talk about it. I really do appreciate the forms sent back, the text messages that I've had back and forth, the emails.
Right. That's what I was just going to say. It's one thing that we sent the form, but then we were having conversations. I think I came across probably 4 different conferences that I was texting coaches about. So, it's a hot button issue. It's good to be a bit of a sounding board, I guess, to know their concerns. Because again, I think this process has softened my stance on it.
Yep.
And has shown me more of the challenges that schools are trying to overcome. So, and that's where my want may not be what the need for the state is. So, yeah. Again, like you said, thank you to all the coaches for being open and honest during this whole process, because that's what it's going to take, right? It's going to take people who have, again, like we said, the best interest of their schools, so that that opinion can be formed, in having all your cards on the table.
Yep. Well, Mitch, I will say from a personal standpoint, from an organization of the podcast standpoint, keeping conferences around for a little longer does make things a little easier on us, because when you really started diving into where all of what we consider our local coverage teams would be headed, some stayed fairly familiar. The NUIC wasn't going to really break up, but man, there was a lot of schools going out to play a lot of different opponents that we were going to have to do a lot more research. I like keeping our, familiarity around on a personal level.
It would have been like probably 10 or 12 different districts that we would have had to cover.
So Yeah, I guess, not that anyone necessarily cares, Mitch, about our personal wants, but
But
anyway.
with this too, though, as I mentioned, there were 14 amendment proposals that were
Yeah.
introduced. You want to go through some things that
Yeah,
passed
let's
here?
go through what else passed, because there are some other things that stand out as interesting or worth talking about.
Okay. Some of these are not for football, and we're not going to go through those. And I might miss one, but I don't think I will. Proposal 4 passed pretty significantly, 578 to 124. Allows coaches to conduct out of season strength and conditioning workouts with limits of no more than 4 days per week and no more than 90 minutes per session outside the season. No coaching of the skills of a sport during any session. So I don't know what it was before that, but looks like we are improving our strength conditioning workouts in the off season. With that, one thing that did fail was Proposal 11, which modified the number of summer contact days. It was going to reduce that down from 25 to 18, which I didn't think was necessarily a terrible idea just in the summer and you're limiting your contact, but I also understand why it would fail to pass. It was close, 407, nay, 3024. So again, that one, the contact days will remain at 25. Another one for strength and conditioning looks pretty similar to Proposal 4. This one passed pretty significantly, allows coaches to conduct strength and conditioning workouts with limits of no more than 4 days per week. Again, I don't know how much that's much different than the first
Yeah.
proposal I said, but let's get down to Proposal 17. If I remember, Greg, was this the one that Geneseo proposed?
Sounds familiar. Yep.
Okay. I think this is the one. It passed 410 to 232, creates the opportunity for football teams to conduct a preseason scrimmage with another school. Specific scrimmage limitations include the following: use of IHSA officials, 4 separate 12-play segments, no special teams, 48 total play limits, no live contact in practice the day before or after scrimmage. Scrimmage is to be held on a Friday or Saturday of IHSA week 7, which I don't know when that calendar starts, but and players are eligible to participate in the scrimmage after participating in 8 different days of practice. So that could be fun.
Yeah, this is a really cool thing to implement, because it just gives you a little bit more flexibility or creativity, saying a team that you wouldn't normally schedule in the regular season for whatever reason, that this would be a reason to do that, right? You're a little more willing to, scrimmage against a bigger school or a school that's much smaller than you. I think just because it wouldn't matter. It'd just be a way to get out there and scrimmage. So I do like that.
You see that with 7-on-7 tournaments.
Yep.
I think I've talked about that before. I always liked doing that. We would play teams like Rochelle or Dixon, teams that you would never ever play in the regular season. So to be able to do this, get some pads on, get some experience for some players. Yeah, I like this proposal. So, and with limitations, I think that's good too.
Mitch, were you a quarterback 7-on-7 guru? Were you excelling at the 7-on-7?
I wouldn't say I was a guru, but we had such good skill players that we were pretty good. We were a pretty good 7-on-7 team. I think we beat Rochelle, and that's a pretty bigger school than Morrison was back in the day. So, the team that I was on was pretty quick. So 7-on-7 was kind of our thing. It was good.
There you go. Not much has changed on in Morrison, because they're still pretty quick. So
yeah. Proposal 18, that was the district. Again, that one failed 379 to 272. Let's see. What else did we pass here? I guess the last one, maybe our favorite here, Greg. Proposal 23 passed 464 to 82 with 181 no votes. Establishes a girls flag football fall season limitation, Monday of week 6 to Saturday of week 21. Again, I have no idea what those weeks are. A preseason practice requirement of 9 practices before a contest, and a regular season contest limitation of 25 games. Seems like a lot.
Yeah.
Exclusive of the IHSA State Series. So yeah, we get girls flag football now as a sanctioned sport.
So does it indicate, will there be playoffs and a state championship then?
It doesn't
I guess
specifically
we don't
say
know that yet. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and again, 25 games seems like a lot, but
I'm
I
thinking
don't know.
that's just an
Hopefully,
overall cap. Like, you know what I mean? They just set it really high, so
right.
you're not going to get up that high. But no, that's great. That's a really cool way to promote the game of football in the state of Illinois. I think that alongside of, maybe this kind of pushes forward a little bit to like, let's get 8-man in there. Let's get 8-man sanctioned, right?
Yeah.
If we're making this move. So I think overall it's all good things if it's more football
Yeah.
being played.
Well, and that's one thing that we didn't really talk about at the top of this episode was that eighth grade, 8-man schools or schools that play 8-man football
Yes.
were able to vote on the 11-man structure. And I don't think they should be excluded in that because things can always change, but it just seemed interesting that was, I don't know, not allowed. It just, again, another one of those caveats that you kind of made you think a little bit.
Yeah, it is interesting, but I mean, I see the need for every school obviously should be able to vote on these issues because in some way or another, it could impact them, not maybe directly, but indirectly. And certainly with the changing landscape of football, some of these schools that are 11-man now voting on this, it could impact them and they could eventually be 8-man. So I think it's important for all schools to vote, but yeah, I get what you're saying that it does seem, odd that they vote now, but they certainly could be impacted.
Yeah. So look at the last thing on the IHSA's release was a breakdown of year by year of how many proposals have been on the ballots the last 10 years and the number of schools that have voted. And as we said, 89.2% of the membership voted for, voted as a part of this whole process, not specifically just to districts, but as a part of this whole process. All in all, it was 727 of 815 IHSA schools that submitted votes under these proposals. So again, you like to see that. That's a jump up from 63% last year, 57% in 21-22 year. It's the highest since 2019-2020, which was 86.5% of the membership. So again, great to have that sort of participation here when we're talking about some big changes.
Yeah, love it. I think it's created great conversation. And like we've said a lot of times, it's not going anywhere. The conversation's going to continue. And I think that's a very good thing. Anything else here, Mitch? We have had a lot of discussion. We have put in a lot of hours of podcast time on this very topic. And for as much as we've reached one conclusion, I think there's still more to talk about.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be the end of it. And again, that this was a learning lesson moving forward, then so be it. But yeah, interested to see how this evolves. But for now, let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's get back to our conference games, and there'll be some need for shuffling around and trying to find some open weeks, but nothing like that would have been needed had this passed. So for now, it's business as usual, and we'll see what the future holds.
Well, speaking of regularly scheduled programming, Mitch, we just conducted our View from the West fantasy football draft, where we compile all the numbers, compile all the players from around our area. You and I sat down with Corey Kuffler from WQAD and Kyle Kampmeyer from NUICfootball.com, and we conducted a fantasy football draft, and we tried to compile the very best team from our area. We also branched out and picked one player from outside of the area, and we picked a head coach to lead our squad. So we'll, I encourage everyone to go out and listen to that, but then also check back on Twitter, check back on the X, and we'll have the rosters posted, and we'll put it to a vote, Mitch, and we'll see who the listeners think drafted the best team.
Yep, fun episode. So hopefully everyone checks it out and enjoys it just as much as we did.
And I will say a little tease. I was very surprised by the first player picked overall. Out of context,
yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say
a worthy pick, a certainly worthy pick, and would have been my first pick. But under the circumstances that the listeners will understand when they listen to the show, yeah, it did come as a surprise.
There you go. All right, that's a tease. Now they got to go listen. See, Mitch, we keep that cliffhanger in there. So
right, yep.
All right, well that'll do it here. Mitch, that may wrap us up for the 2023 football season here. So I I appreciate everyone who has listened along the way this season. We really do, love the people who listen, interact with us on Twitter, interact with Mitch on Twitter when he's, firing out tweets every, mile a minute on Friday nights or on Saturdays during the playoffs. So it's been a ton of fun. Mitch, anything to say to our loyal listeners before we wrap it up here?
No, I don't think so. Like you said, this was a great year. This is probably our most fun year that we've had. We made some big strides. So looking forward to moving forward.
Yep. We're going to take maybe a bye week or a bye month maybe, and then get back into things in 2024. Again, thank you for listening. We'll be back as news happens or as we feel like we want to, jump back in and hit record. So until then, thank you. We'll see you in 24. That'll do it for this week's episode of View from the West. Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to go out to Apple Podcasts or Podbean and subscribe so you can follow along, and downloads will come automatically every week. You can follow along on Twitter at ViewFromWestPod. You can also email me if you're interested in being a sponsor, viewfromwestpod@gmail.com. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.